along the way, doing the things that you also want to do in your life will make you feel better about your career choices. There's a real trap in, like, I defined myself solely by my work for so much of my life, all through my teens, all through my 20s. But as soon as I decided to go for it and have the baby that I desperately wanted to have, and also focusing on stuff like, if I want to take a trip now, I do it. And if I get an audition, I'll do it from there. Prioritizing other things at the same time has made me feel better about my career because it's not the only thing anymore.
Hey there, it's Ginny.
And I'm Monica.
And this is Hitting Her Mark,
a podcast for women in the arts, actors, filmmakers, artists who are passionately chasing their creative dreams
while juggling the beautiful chaos of caring for those they love.
We're here to share stories, insights, and inspiration, proving that you can hit your mark without compromising what matters most.
So if you're ready to make your creative dreams a reality, let's dive in.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Hitting Her Mark. We're so glad to have you here. Today, we have a special bonus holiday episode. Today, we're joined by Nicola Correia-Damude, an actor with a long, steady career across film, television, and theater. You've seen her in Coroner, Shadowhunters, Burden of Truth, and most recently, Law & Order: Criminal Intent. She's a Canadian Screen Award-nominated performer of Guyanese descent and someone the industry trusts to deliver consistently strong and thoughtful work. We're so happy to have her with us. We hope you enjoy. Today, we're honored to welcome Nicola Correia-Damude, an accomplished Guyanese Canadian actor whose career has spanned over 25 years, and she's garnered a number of credits over her career, including her standout work in Shadowhunters, The Boys, and most recently, Law & Order: Toronto: Criminal Intent. She's also a 3-time Canadian Screen Award nominee. Nicola, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Let's dive in. You've built such a multi-dimensional career across theater, film, TV, music, voice work. When did your artistic journey begin for you?
So I'm one of those people who always wanted to do this, like from as long as I can remember. There was never anything else I wanted to do. My dad was a filmmaker and worked in the arts. My mom was the exact opposite, but was very supportive. So even when I was young, like my dad always dealt with things with art, right? So like, when we were grieving, he had us sing. When we wanted to do something fun, it would be funny voices and drama games. And so I always wanted to do this. And then I went to, I think like the big turning point was going to Etobicoke School for the Arts, a high school here in Toronto, at a time when it was really in its heyday, when we were really allowed and able to just dive in 100%. So it was the perfect place for me. I was one of those teenagers too, who had a lot of problems, a lot of mental health problems, and like really could have gone a few different directions. And going to an art school where I could just focus on drama, it just gave my life focus. It made it very clear that that's what I needed to do. And, so yeah, after that, I sort of just never looked back. After I made the decision to just commit to it fully, instead of going to, I went to university for a year to do theater. And then after that, I was like, I actually really just want a conservatory program. I just want to go all in. And so that was when I was 20. And yeah, I just sort of haven't looked back. I mean, you look back sometimes, and in hard times, you look back and go, is that the, but ultimately, I haven't looked back. Yeah. Yeah.
Training at places like the Etobicoke School of Arts and Studio 58. I think you also did a conservatory. Was it the Birmingham Conservatory? Like, how did that shape you as an artist and as a person, really?
So I personally am of the opinion that training is as important for an actor as training is in any other profession. I think that we underestimate. Sometimes you hear these narratives of people being like, it's just in you. And you just like, I don't think that's true. I don't think I don't think that's true. I think some of us are born with the drive for that. Some people are born with like a natural talent. Absolutely. But to be really good at anything and to be able to do it as a profession, to be able to do various things because as an artist, not just in Canada but particularly I think in Canada, you need to be able to do a million things. You need to be able to do you can't just do theater, you can't just do TV, you can't just do film, you can't just do voice. You have to be able to do a lot of things. And so there's two things. I think training is really important because technique is really important. I transitioned from theater to film and TV a bit later. And they're entirely different techniques. If you want to do them really well, if you want to do either one well, and if you want to be able to do both, your technique has to be very strong. And they both require a level of technique that takes training. Or like
Mm.
you can't learn all of it on your own. It does require work. What that looks like can be different for everyone. But I'm also a firm believer in like continuing that work and continuing that training. So that's the first thing, is the technique that we underestimate sometimes in art. That there is real technique and work to be done. But I also think the discipline, one of the things about both my high school and my theater school, I went to Studio 58 in Vancouver, and that was hardcore. Like that was 14, 15 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week, a lot of the time. And part of the philosophy was you need to see if you can do this for a living, because when you build a life as an artist, at least for the first number of years, you're working 2 and 3 jobs at a time. Like I remember when I first got out of school, and even now, like depending on how your career goes, like you're working your day job and then you're going to your second day job before you go to your rehearsals, before or you have to like shoot a 12-hour day. And even when you're working full time as an actor, like if you're lucky enough, I've been lucky enough these last 10 years to be making my living entirely as an actor. But in order to do that, particularly as a Canadian, or particularly doing, not just as a Canadian, but basically outside of the US, outside of big SAG contracts, you're often like, I'm doing 3 and 4 shows at a time to be able to build the career that I want. And so you're working a 16-hour day, sleeping 2 hours. But so that discipline that comes from training can't be underestimated. And it's not an industry where you can say like, oh, I'm tired, or oh, I can't do that day. So you have to learn and practice fortitude, and you have to learn and practice how to manage your energy. So I think training is absolutely invaluable, and I don't think there's any substitute for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love how you emphasize that. So, because, yeah, exactly. If they call you at 3 a.m. in the morning, guess what? You can't say, oh, I don't do that. You show up at 3 a.m. in the morning and you sit in that chair and you do whatever you do. Or if they hand you a brand new script and say, we have some revisions, you don't get to say, oh, wait a minute, I already learned my other lines. You're just like,
Yeah.
okay.
Like, sorry, no can do. Yeah. I also think the thing that we underestimate with technique as well is like, I think a lot of people envision before they do it. I don't know that anyone does this once they're actually doing it, but I think when we're young, we envision like when, you see these examples, or you hear like the 0.01% of like big famous actors on the Graham Norton show or whatever, talking about like, I immersed myself in the character for a year and I learned the voice and I learned that. That's like 0.001 maybe percent of actors.
Yeah.
Most actors have to go from job to job. We don't get time to rehearse. We don't
No.
get, so the technique becomes incredibly important because, for example, like I used to coach before, while I was in that transition from theater to film, I made my living coaching actors. And one of the things that I used to say to them is like, nobody cares if you're actually feeling it. They care if the audience is feeling it, right? So we would love to feel it as artists. We feel the best about our work and our art when we are feeling it. But you don't have that option on a day when it's not coming to go like, sorry guys, I'm not feeling it, or hey director, I need an extra hour for my coverage. That's not going to happen. That's not reality. So if you can't get there that day, you have to have the technique to cry, the technique to laugh on your worst day, the technique to, it's like you have to be able to do that or you don't work, right?
Yeah.
So I think technique is there to allow us to do this, not just as passion projects, and not just the technique is there to support us in being the kind of actor who can do any job, any day, anytime.
Yeah, it's like the foundation that you fall back on, right? It's like, if anything,
Exactly.
it's there. It's like it's holding you up.
Yeah.
I had the pleasure of watching you work, Italina, as well. The other week, we were on set together, and you had a very emotional scene. And those of us that understand how TV film works, you don't just get to be emotional one time. You get to do it about 20. And you were able to bring it every single time. Can you talk a little bit about your process for that and the use of your technique for those of us who shy away from those roles because we feel like we're scared that we can't get there?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I think those kinds of roles are very interesting, right? So people often want to be the regular or the recurring and I've been lucky enough to play a lot of those parts in my life. But what people underestimate a lot is guest star roles, I think, are actually some of the most challenging, particularly on things like medical dramas, which is what we worked on together. Because you come in for one episode, you don't know anyone, you don't know the crew, and you're often asked to carry the emotional load, right? It's true in crime shows. It's true in, because the guest stars are the people who represent the big drama for that episode, right? So you're in this kind of bubble where you're not part of the group, you have no familiarity with the group, and yet you're asked to carry the emotional. And that's why, like on Law and Order, as a regular, I look at our guest stars and I'm always like, how you doing? Like, you doing okay? Because like this is a lot. So the technical part, I think, is really important on those days, because we don't get the time to rehearse, right? Like, and very rarely in film and TV do you get the time to rehearse. So my process starts with going through and asking myself, what is the emotional arc of the story, right? Because one of the pitfalls of playing a role that is extremely emotional and where a character is in a lot of trauma over the whole episode, for example, is you can't play the same note for the whole thing, right?
Mm.
So you have to ask yourself, in this person's world, and who are they in their everyday life? What is this day in their life? Right? So what does this day represent? And in each of these scenes, what is the level of emotion? In each of these scenes, what is the level of, what's a surprise? What's new information? What are the things that what are the scenes where they're holding back, and what are the scenes where they're letting go? Right? And figuring out the pacing, I think, is really important. Technically speaking, so I'll give you an example of the show that we're talking about, which we can't say what it is yet because it hasn't come out yet, but it's a great example, and it's true of most medical dramas and crime dramas, at least. It's sort of that procedural type show. How it's shot and who's directing it also makes a big difference, right? So in my case, I was doing that episode because I knew the director and she asked for me because of our working relationship. And so one of the things I love about her and about that show is that they actually arranged it so that one of our really big days, where we did a lot of the emotional scenes in the same day in the hospital, we did them in sequence. We did them in order, right? So which is the best way to work and happens very rarely, right? So what was great about that, and that's where great directing comes in, right? Like and great producing, the decision that we're going to, even if it might be easier to do the last scene first and the second scene, to try and do it in sequence. Because that first day of shooting, by the time we got to that last most emotional scene, I was feeling every take, because we'd been working for 10 hours, living in that world together with the other actors, feeling that pain. My body was tired. My mind was tired, which isn't a bad thing because that's where the character's at. So by that last scene, I really was in that place. The tears were authentic, and it was a beautiful moment. But that is really uncommon. 9 times out of 10, you get to set and they're like, hey, we're going to do the big emotional scene first because it has to be in the atrium. And, And that was sort of what happened on the day that I saw you guys. Was the day that we were working together, was a day when it was like first up in the day. It's the last scene of the story arc. It's the hardest, in some ways, the most emotional scene. And it's at 6 a.m. on the last day of shooting. So those are the days where you really need to have your technique in place. Those are the days where you have to, I will often, this is the thing that not a lot of actors, I think, like to say, but I think it's true for most of us. We don't like to say it because I think we feel like we're giving away, like magicians don't want to like give away their tricks. We want people to think that we are 100. Like, sure, in a perfect world, I'd love to be like, yes, I'm so emotionally, I have so much access that every moment. No, that's not true.
I just flip a switch.
I go like this and it comes, right? So, but crying, for example, in a perfect world, we're feeling it, but crying is something you can learn to do. It's a lot to do with breath. It has to do with images, absolutely. But on the days when the images won't come, like on the happiest day of your life when you have to cry at work, breath work is a lot to do with it. The way you touch your face, the way you practice, like where do you touch on your body that makes you feel that sadness? What's the posture of sobbing for you? What is the feel? How do you breathe? Most of us, if you breathe in the rhythm of sobbing for yourself, it tells your brain. So there's all of these technical things. And those aren't, I feel like I've met young actors who are like, no, but I don't want to cheat. It's like, no, it's not, this is a job. You must be able to bring it every time.
There is a technical, there's a technical component that you have to consider.
Exactly. And you have to be able to do it on your best days and your worst days. So for me, that's sort of the process. Is I go through and I figure out authentically, what do I think this journey is? I go through and I figure out, where do I think this character's at each of these moments? And then you play on the day and you get into that emotional space. And then if it's not happening the way that you want, then you layer the technique on top. So it's that idea of like the toolbox, right? It's like you just have to have all those tools in there. And some days it's really right there and some days it's not, and you have to make sure that and it's same with theater, like you have to, the audience deserves the same performance every night, whether or not you feel it, right? Similarly, a film and television audience deserves to feel it themselves, whether or not you feel it. And that's our job. So there's actually a lot of artistry in the technique as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and it comes back to that whole idea of the foundation that you build as an actor and the toolkits and bringing out those tools whenever you need them based on the situation you're presented with. So just going back for a second, so I do want to just mention that your theater beginnings, you had spent some significant time on stage with Stratford, Shaw, Tarragon, Can Stage. So I'm sure theater has taught you a lot along the way. But what was that transition like moving into film and television? Like your earliest screen roles go back to 2005. What do you remember about those first on-camera experiences? What were some of the challenges you faced during that time breaking into TV and film? And making that transition from theater into film and TV?
Yeah, I actually think that transitioning from either one to the other is the challenge of that cannot be underestimated. The way that, and this is not a popular opinion necessarily, but it's one that I stand by. I think it's really important to view theater performance and camera performance as entirely different things. I think you have to approach them and look at them as different things. To me, one of the only things they have in common is character building and emotional world. They have those in common. And that's like kind of one of the biggest parts of the foundation of our work. Technically, they have nothing in common. And if you don't allow yourself to make that switch, so for me, that was the big moment when I stopped trying to, like in the beginning, I found film really challenging because I was like, but I'm not embodying, I'm not feeling, because every time I did, people said it was too big and I was like, but then when I make it smaller, I don't feel it. And it was like anything else, you have to relearn the feelings. Right? You have to relearn. So one of the things that I always say to actors, and I actually, like during COVID, I offered a bunch of free classes for people in my industry for transitioning from theater to film, because I know so many theater actors who would make brilliant film and TV actors, but they're not booking parts because they just haven't made the technical switch yet, but they'll be amazing. And most theater actors, it doesn't take that long because the technique is there. They just have to learn how to use it differently. Right? So for me, the biggest challenge was feeling terrible about my work for a while. Right? So having to realize that for a while, I was going to feel like I wasn't doing a good job because it wasn't what I was used to feeling, right? So I'd be doing a scene in theater and I would be like, oh yeah, I really feel like I'm in the zone now. In film and TV, I never felt like I was in the zone. Everything felt too small. Everything felt too contained, everything. And it was actually about learning that the sensation in your body when you're accomplishing a moment in film and TV is a different feeling than when you're accomplishing it on stage, because you're working with different energy levels, you're working different sizes. And that's about practice. It's about trust. I had a couple of coaches early on who were like, do nothing and allow it to feel terrible and just allow it to feel awful to you, because it will. And then I'd watch it and they'd go, see, it's good. Because you're already bringing so much to it, because as a theater person, you're already layering so many, that when you tell yourself to do nothing, you're still doing a million things, and sometimes I was still doing too much. Right. But I felt like, so now at this point, and then after a few years of really adjusting to that feeling, now I think, as I started doing, I kept doing theater for, there was about 3 years where I was doing both theater and film and TV at the same time. And that was interesting because then sometimes I'd come off set and I'd go to my theater show, and I'd have to like remind myself that it wasn't too big and remind myself to use that different technique. So that was the biggest challenge, was learning that it's actually going to feel different. All acting is not the same. Successful theater acting feels different in your body and in your mind and in yourself than good film acting does. And once you can accept that, that's where you can really grow in both. And that's when you start to be able to go back and forth faster. But you have to be willing to accept that they are different. They feel different. They're different techniques, and don't try and make them the same thing. So that took a few years. There's a few years, I would say maybe 3 years, where I was really grappling with that shift. And then I feel like once you find it, it's like, it is a bit of a riding a bike thing. I feel like once you feel it, then you're like, okay, now I can go back and forth a little easier, right? But again, practice. Like I've been doing all film and TV for the last almost 10 years now, or 8 years, I guess, since I did my last play. I think if I were to do a play tomorrow, I would have to revisit that again, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel that way when you're flipping between genres? Like with
Totally.
TV?
Absolutely. That's such a great question. Yes. That's actually so key too, because one thing that I say to people a lot about film and TV too, when I coach people, is like, you have to know what the show is. If you go into a procedural doing like naturalistic drama performance, you will not get that job because that's not what it looks like. If you, there's a few clear examples if you look at like pop culture or just culture in general. So you look at like Aaron Sorkin, right? You look at the pace of Aaron Sorkin's work. If you went to audition for the West Wing and were doing like, dialogue the way they do in like, a show like Parenthood, where it's a lot of improv and a lot of like, or where it's a lot of, very naturalistic. If you go into an audition for Aaron Sorkin and you're improvising lines like we do when we audition for TV movies or things like that, you're not going to get that job because that's not what it is. That's not what the style is. You can't audition for Law and Order with the performance that you would do for a show like Doc or a show like, you have to go into them knowing what the genre is. I really recommend watching a lot of TV. It's like the best homework ever. Watch a lot of TV and really get to know what it is that genres are, what they require. There's also a different level of naturalism that's required of different kinds of television, right? So for example, some shows you really want to take time and you want to lean into the emotion of it. You want to you want to breathe a lot. Other shows you really have to be on the dialogue and on the pace. And you have to get to know and you have to practice it. I think that's a big part of it too. And it can be really hard. Like there was a period where I was doing a lot of procedurals. It was about 2 years where I was doing a lot of procedurals. And then I got this amazing audition for this French show that was very naturalistic and very gritty. And I was so embarrassed because I got a call back. And then at the callback, it was with the director and he was like, great. He's like, that's great. And it was a show about police officers, but it was totally naturalistic. And he was like, that's great, but this isn't network TV. This isn't, because I was used to doing more network procedural kind of stuff for those few years. And he was like, but that's not what this is. So we need to like shake it up, let it go. I need you to break it up. I need you to, and I realized that I was out of practice at that, and it ended up being really fun to try, but I had to come out of that audition and I had to go and get some scenes out and practice and work on getting that back, right? Because they're muscles too that we're using. Comedy too, like I started doing a lot of comedy the last few years. The timing of comedy totally different than the timing of drama. So yeah, I think knowing what genre you're working in from the audition all the way through to production is really key, and practicing those genres.
And coming back to film and television, I'm curious about typecasting. I'm curious about what that whole situation was for you. I know you're Guyanese Canadian and you're a mixed heritage person. So what was that experience like for you entering the film and television world of casting versus like theater, for example?
It was terrible. It was a god-awful, terrible nightmare for like a decade. And that was true of theater and film and TV. They were both terrible. I came up in a time, I would imagine, a lot of actors can relate to this, but if you weren't small and white, if you weren't a woman who was small and white and fit a very narrow box, there were just no options for you outside of the very stereotypical. So, and that was true in theater too. For me, the big race was big in terms of the kinds of roles that people would let me audition for sure. But even bigger was body type. I was like a size 10. I've always been a size 10, 12, like between 8 and 12 my whole life. And that was just fat. And they would just tell you, you're too fat for this. Like they would just like,
oh my God.
And this was in theater and film and TV. It happened to me at Stratford. Stratford was actually one of the first times it happened. It was terrible where I was told by the director that I was just like, I was supposed to be pretty in the show. So if I could lose weight, that would be great. I had agents, I had casting directors say things like, well, how's her weight doing? Because she was too fat last time. Like they would just, but here's the irony of all of that is that those same casting directors and producers hire me now, no problem, because the culture's changed, right? Bad producers, bad directors, bad casting people. And there are a lot of great ones, but the bad ones are the ones who are just always going for the trend and what boxes are hitting at the moment. And they're like that. They were like that then, they're like that now, but now I fit the boxes. Now I'm exotic and curvaceous instead of fat and ethnic, right? It's just the change in the culture, right? I don't actually think a lot of
it's like what's in demand or something. It's like
exactly. And all
What's
of
the trend?
Yeah. And the things that made me a liability before are the things that now those same people want me for those reasons, which was really big for me in realizing that it was never about me as my career went on, like in terms of helping our self-esteem and going like, oh, this was never, I think about, my eating disorder. I've had an eating disorder since I was like 14 years old because I never fit the boxes anywhere. And it was always and now I'm older and bigger than I was 20 years ago. And all of a sudden I'm more attractive because purely due to cultural shifts, right? So it's all bullshit. It's all constructs. But I would say professionally, the way it affected me most was that I just wasn't allowed to audition for most things. Like leads, I just wasn't given the opportunity to because the lead was going to be white. The lead was and if she wasn't white, she was going to have the body of what was seen as that stereotypical, beautiful Anglo woman, right? White woman. So I just wasn't, those were just never something I was allowed to play. I was never allowed to audition for parts that weren't Hispanic. Ironically, I'm not even Hispanic. My family's from the Caribbean, right? But I play purely Latinos because no one knows the difference, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a lot in common. I don't argue that. And there are people who will argue that because Guyana is in Latin America or is in South America and because the Portuguese have like vaguely Latin roots and da da da. So I don't quibble with being referred to as Latino. That doesn't bother me. But I was only ever allowed to audition for characters who were going to intentionally be not white, right? To the point where I had a moment with like, I can't remember which network it was with, but like they sent me this, I booked this role and the character's last name was Chang. And I was like, well, I'm not. And they were like, oh, it's fine. We'll just change it. It just needs to be. And I was like, I know what you're about to say. And then they stop, but they always stop it. But it's like, you just need to not be white was the idea. Right. So that was really, but again, the story of my career, essentially the narrative boils down to if you stand in the doorway long enough, even as the door keeps slamming in your face, if you're standing there long enough and you keep being good at your work and you keep working hard and you keep being nice and you don't get jaded and stop entirely, which most people do because it's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
For some of us, the door eventually swings open when your time comes. But it's not that your time comes because it's fair. It's not because your time comes because and that's why, one thing I think is really interesting is I'll often talk about being lucky and people go, oh, don't say that, you work hard. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that I'm lucky, meaning that I didn't deserve it. I'm saying that I have a lot of peers, other women, Latin women, Asian women, Indigenous women, friends of mine who are just as talented as I was, worked just as hard, but the door never opened. Right.
Mm-hmm.
We were like, and at this point in my life, any woman in our age group who is still working at this is talented, is working hard, there's no one left anymore who isn't those things. And then there is luck to the rest of it. Luck and kindness are really the things that will then allow you to be able to make your living at it. So yeah, I would say race and body type were the two biggest things that got in my way. But also when the door opened, for me, it opened quite wide because really the American market suddenly went, wait a minute, we have this huge Latin American population. And then Canada was like, oh crap, we don't have anyone to offer you because we told them all that they were too fat and too ethnic for so long. Where are we going to get them from? Like, where are we going to get them from? And so for the few of us who were lucky enough to have stuck it out, all of a sudden there were opportunities and the opportunities have gotten better and better. It's not perfect. Like you still don't see lead. My body type still doesn't get lead roles. Like, we still don't play leads very often. The leads are still predominantly white and a very particular body type. Generally speaking, there are definitely exceptions, which is great. But it's still like, things haven't gone that much.
90%.
Yeah, exactly. And even statistically, it's so funny. It's been hard like post, with more of the interest in people of color and mixed race people being in our industry. I've had a few disappointing moments with white friends who I really respected before, but who have said straight to my face, like, oh, you're so lucky that you're BIPOC because there's no work for white people now. And it's like, it's so funny because, a couple of them that I felt strongly enough about, I actually had the conversation. Other people, I was just like, thank you, we're not going to be chatting in the future. But the ones that I cared about, I made a point of saying like, there's two problems with that statement. One is that it suggests that you deserved it more than me before when it was you, right? Mm-hmm. And it suggests that I don't deserve it now. Right? So you never deserved to have 90% of the market. That's just how it went. I didn't work for a decade because I wasn't right. Now I'm right and you don't get to work as much, but that's not because it's unfair to you, right? Like it's not unfair that I get to work now. It's not fair that we now have 5% of the roles. You still got your 85%, right? Yeah. So, and you still have your leads. You still have probably 95 or more % of lead roles. So it's an interesting, but I will say that I've seen a huge change but that change doesn't apply to other races, right? So I've seen a huge change for people like myself, for mixed race people, and for Latin, a lot of, and yeah, I haven't seen that personally in my circle anyway. I haven't seen it for my Asian friends. I haven't seen it for my Indigenous friends. I certainly haven't seen it for my South Asian friends. You know what I mean? So it's like, there's still a very long way to go. My hope is that will change. But yeah, so those were sort of the biggest barriers, where for years it was like the feedback was like, she's great, we love her, but it's going to be this person who fits the mold more.
And to add to that, it also becomes systemic, because it's like, oh, well, for such a long time, all of these white people have been getting these big chunky roles. They have this huge resume. And then when you look at it now and you're like, well, she's got this huge resume and this person only has a few roles and they're bit parts.
Right.
She deserves it more, right? And it just keeps going that way. But it's like, well, I never had the chance.
Exactly. And that's the thing that I think is so weird, that people have a hard time. Like, I had this conversation recently about meritocracy, because, and it was someone posted about how all of there were like, this was a couple years ago, but 3 big theater companies in Canada switched leadership, and all 3 of those leadership roles went to white men. And it started this conversation in this Facebook theater group that I'm in, where people were like, this is terrible. And this one guy responded and was like, well, but like, look at their credentials. Like, if this is a meritocracy, then they deserved it. And then those men deserve those roles. And I wrote back and I was like, there can be no meritocracy when there is no equal opportunity or access to work. Meritocracy only exists if there's a merit-based system that is inclusive, right? So we have no idea, like you just said, Jenny. It's like, so I think meritocracy is bullshit. There's no meritocracy in this culture, right? You can't have a merit-based system without equal opportunity. So I just don't think it's a real argument. This comes up a lot with casting with lead roles in big shows that are both American and Canadian, where there'll be like a list of must-haves, right? So the leads have to be, the network will say they have to cover like 3 bases. They have to have led a show before. They have to have an American profile. Let's say for a big Canadian show, they have to have led a show before. They have to have an American profile, and they have to have a certain social media following. These are 3 examples, right? Well, people of color will not have led shows before because we didn't let them. So that immediately takes all the people of color off the short list. They have to have an American following. That could apply to certain, like, most of my shows are American. So I guess maybe that one I could stay in the running for, but I'm already off the list because I haven't led a show because I can think of a show in Canada anyway, that a Latin woman has led or an Asian woman has led. It might be, but the fact that I can't think of off the top of my head means it's not many, right?
Yeah.
Social media following, similar thing. To have a big social media following, you have to have been on big shows. So you have to have had access, right? So it's like, instantly, just in the short list, you've been left with the same small pool of people.
Right.
So yeah, meritocracy, I don't think is a real thing. And we can't talk about it until this whole culture changes.
Right. Yeah. Especially in this industry where it's like art and it's subjective and it's not math. You can't just take a test, blind taste test, and see who you like better.
And we have all of this proof that it's not true, right? So you look at, like, I remember the year Orange is the New Black came out. And I remember all of these people saying to me, oh my God, like, where did these amazing actresses come from? Like, why have I never seen them before? And I was like, because they're they're predominantly Black and Hispanic. And so you haven't seen them before because they haven't been allowed to do jobs before, right?
Yeah.
But the only reason they were allowed to do those jobs is because those shows, like, and this is the nitty gritty that a lot of people we don't have to get into it here, but like the nitty gritty that a lot of people don't realize is how things are cast also based on who's producing them, based on the funding, right? So if you do a show on a streaming service, like, for example, you take something like early days of Showtime and Netflix, right? It was like, you had to have like a minimum of 4 to 6 million viewers to get a second season on NBC or ABC or CBS. You need 400,000. You needed 400,000 to get another season on Showtime or HBO or Netflix, right? So they were allowed to take bigger risks because people were like, sure, go ahead. Like, we haven't put all our eggs in this basket. Go for it. So they cast who they wanted to cast. They cast who was best for the job. They cast people who were outside the box thinking for that time. And a lot of streaming shows actually, and not just streaming shows, sorry, a lot of non-network television has set the stage for diversity to flourish and older female roles to flourish because they didn't have to worry as much about checking the boxes. And I think that's a really important thing for us to remember.
Yeah, it's a very important conversation. And I feel like you've been pretty vocal about these kinds of things, which I love. I've listened to a couple of your podcast episodes as well, and other and yeah, I think it's a conversation that needs to be had more ongoing, obviously, in this industry. I do want to dive into some of your specific projects you've worked on. Let's start with Shadowhunters. Maurice Lightwood. I mean, you've had so many credits. It was hard to kind of narrow it down, to be honest. I was like,
So many
"Oh,
credits.
there's so many." But let's start with Shadowhunters. That character was such a beloved character in the series. What did that role mean to you personally and professionally, especially at that stage of your career? I know you did 20 episodes. I think that was like your first, like, largest or longest standing show, I think, because it was the longest.
That time.
Yeah,
It was my first big, it was my first big American show. I mean, I'd done The Strain. I had a recurring on The Strain, but it was like 4-episode arc.
Yeah.
I'd done like a few episode arcs on America. I did 6 episodes on this or that.
Yes.
But in terms of big shows, it was that show changed my whole career. It changed my whole life because it became so popular, and it was the kind of credit and the kind of exposure that opened a lot of doors to me moving forward. It's a great example too. It also proved something to me, which was really important, because I think sometimes we get so in our heads. I think in a lifetime as an artist, unfortunately, you're told so many times, with actors anyway, female actors in particular, with people of color, you're told many, many times what you're not going to be allowed to do, right? So you're not going to be able to play this. You're not going to be able to play that. You're not going to be able to do this. You're not going to do that. So when I got the audition for that show, first of all, I was 20 years younger than the character, which I didn't realize at the time wasn't a problem for Hollywood.
Right.
Because that was also another thing, right? But I was like, oh, I'm too young. Also, it was a big Hollywood show, and it was a show with a lot of aesthetic. And I had just had a baby. I was 180 something pounds. I was breastfeeding, boobs out to here, I'd had my son 3 months before that.
Wow.
I was basically, like, having been told my whole life that my body was what was going to keep me from working. I was much more that than I had ever been before. And I really went into that audition, but I was really happy. And, I had a crying baby at home. I had a newborn. So I was like, I really kind of got into delving into just enjoying the character. And I went in and I auditioned. And it just so happened, and this is the luck piece of all of this, is that the director on the block, my character came in a couple of episodes into season 1, and the director on that block happened to be, it's an American show, but he happened to be a Canadian director who I had known from a guest star I'd done years before. And he's never said it out loud, but I know that he went into that room and pushed hard for me. And not that the others, I mean, I know, because in the future, I've spoken to the producers over the next 10 years or whatever, but they did like me, but he definitely was like, vouched for me and was like, she can do this. Because initially they were going to cast that as it was going to be an American actor to play that role. So that's where things in your past sort of start to line up. It's also why when you get a smaller role in a show, like this director who pushed for this for me, I had not got the regular role on the show he was casting, but I'd done a bunch of auditions with him, and I didn't get that role years before. And then he remembered me from that and ended up giving me the biggest job of my career years later, right? So every audition, every process is part of your future, and you just don't see it yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Shadowhunters was huge for my career in terms of profile and in terms of access to future work. It was also really interesting because my character went through a ton of changes. So basically over the 3 seasons, I kind of played 3 different characters, really. And that was a really interesting challenge. It was also my first time really, other than The Strain, it was my first time doing that style. So that sort of fantasy sci-fi world. And that's a very particular technique. And it's so funny because actors, like I find young actors in particular, like you talk to actors who are in theater school and they're like, I want to do real work. I don't want to do sci-fi. And you're like, okay, first of all, what does that even mean? Second of all, it is so much harder sometimes to do genre work than it is to do the technique, and the ability to make the most of more stylized work is actually really fun. And I loved it. I had a blast. And then it's also the show that, like, that's sort of the show that I cut my teeth on, but it's also the show that, like, I was making the bare minimum money on that show. I made less money on that show, just for context. I would make in 1 season on that show what I make in 2 episodes now.
Wow.
I made the bare minimum Canadian money on that show because I had no bargaining power then, right?
Mhm.
I had no, and I think there's part of me that that understands that as part of the process. As a Canadian actor, the way our unions work, we have the opportunity to do these big American shows because there's a requirement to cast a certain number of Canadians. At that point in my career, I wouldn't have booked that show if it was shooting in the States because I didn't have a high enough profile. You know what I mean? So there's an argument to be made. The problem is in Canada, it then continues for your whole career where you're making the minimum money, and that can't happen. That shouldn't happen. But in the beginning, it really was a show that changed my career, even though it wasn't a big financial thing for me. However, we got canceled 6 years ago. So we did 3 seasons, and a movie, 3 seasons and a 2-hour finale because we got canceled really abruptly. And I've been doing conventions for that show.
Yes.
Fan conventions in countries all over the world ever since. So I was just at one last week. I came back 3 days ago from Paris doing a thing, which has been one of the most incredible, crazy, eye-opening, not just because of all the amazing travel I've got to do, but because of the experience of fan culture, the experience of what it's like getting to be a tourist in fame, which I think is really an interesting thing for an actor to be able to do, like fame tourism, where it's like no one gives a crap about me. Like I could walk out of my house naked right now and people would be like, oh, who's that? But getting to experience what it's like to be a famous person for a few weeks every year and learn a lot about what I actually do and don't want career-wise. Like it turns out I actually don't want that. I thought, I think when you're young, you're like, oh, I want to be famous. I want to be known for my work. I want people I want to not be able to walk down the street. And turns out that's not true of me at all. It actually makes me very anxious, right? So all of these experiences, but also just the opportunity to travel, the opportunity to make part of my living, traveling the world, meeting fans. Like, so that show just is this really weird, beautiful pocket of my life that just blows my mind. It was an unbelievable piece of luck and joy in my whole life. And now we're going on. My son's 11, so it's been 11 years now that I've been part of that journey. It's been beautiful. Yeah,
I love that.
And you have a new show coming out. I think it actually at the time of this recorder, 2 new shows, but one of them starts today. Dropped today. That's Ripple. Did you want to talk a little bit about that experience?
Sure, yeah, Ripple. So I'm recurring on Ripple. I think I'm in 4 of the 6 episodes. I guess it's out now, so I can talk about it. It's so funny that's kind of stuff you spend.
Right, you have to
talk about it, and then suddenly your life feels wrong when you do. Ripple was great. Ripple shot in Toronto, which was so nice for me because I'm on the road a lot, partially because I believe in going where the work is, and I have the ability to do that, which I'm very privileged to have because I have family support with my parenting, and my son's old enough so he can come with me. So I do a lot of traveling. So shooting something in Toronto was amazing. That was great. Also the people, like most of my stuff is with Marcy T. House, who is just like, I'm sure you guys have seen Marcy's work. She's just incredible. And we became really good friends. It really was one of those things where our storyline was very personal, and we just ended up, because it's not always true. Like sometimes you'll hear in interviews, people be like, oh, the show's just like a family, and it's total bullshit. It's not true. And with this show, I was very much like, I was with Frankie Faison and Marcy T. House most of the time. I had we had a few big group party scenes and stuff where I met the rest of the cast, and they were all genuinely, like, in all seriousness, I just wouldn't bring it up if it wasn't true. They were all genuinely lovely. But most of my stuff was with those 2 people, was with Frankie and Marcy. And they really were just amazing. And it's a friendship that came out of that show. Sometimes you have different things come out of different shows. And for that show, that friendship with Marcy was really key. And also, I think, like all this stuff I've been talking about, like one of the things that's interesting about Ripple is that it really, it represents a lot of the things that we were talking about earlier. Like, there's an amazing character on the show. You don't see a lot of non-binary characters on television. Particularly on bigger networks and streaming services. There's, like my relationship with Marcy, you've got like mixed race Guyanese Canadian woman and a Black woman in a love story. You've got there's like the number of there's a way that they address the illness of one of the lead characters. There's the diversity on the show, not just in terms of race, but the diversity in terms of personality. I think it was a very honest. I really enjoyed the scripts. I thought the creators did a beautiful job, and the head writer, obviously, so yeah, it was great. I mean, it wasn't a show that I was a huge part of. Like, it's funny because you go like, 4 to 6 episodes, story, depending on what your storyline is. Like The Boys, I did 3 seasons of The Boys, and I think I worked with someone other than the Queen Maeve character like 3 times total in the entire 3 seasons. You know what I mean? Because it depends on what your storyline is, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Ripple is a show that I didn't feel like I was, it's not a show where I felt like I was that connected to the whole big picture, but they definitely made every effort to make us all feel that way, right? Like we were the creators were amazing that way. And the Cameron sisters on Law and Order, they're like that too. Like they create a sense of everyone being a part of the family, a part of the group. And I also think the show is a lot of integrity. I think it's beautiful. I think the writing is beautiful. I think there's a lot of integrity in the storytelling. So I think, yeah, I was very proud to be a part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's out on Netflix. I can't wait to watch it.
Yeah.
I also want to get into, of course, Law and Order, where you play forensic pathologist Lucy De Silva. Okay, this is like a childhood. Like, I loved Law and Order. I freaking loved it. So this must have been like a really exciting opportunity. I kind of want to know what the audition process was like. I want to know, the challenges of working in a procedural, especially when you have to deliver so much medical terminology. How do you prep for that? How do you prepare for something like that? And what is it like being on such an iconic show, the Canadian iteration of such an iconic show?
So the first thing I'm going to draw your attention to, if you draw your eyes up, this is my office. Do you see that there? You can't see what I'm pointing at. If you look right there below my finger, see that? That is my box set of 20 seasons of Law and Order, the box set. And next to it there is the Law and Order board game, and next to that is the Law and Order book, behind the scenes book. And all of those were things that I had long before I was on the show. Because there's only two things in my entire life that I've ever been a true, what I would call fan of, like what I understand fandom to be, like, being a fan of something. Two things. One was the Harry Potter books. But long before that was Law and Order. So I started watching Law and Order. If you're from Toronto, you'll know, and you grew up in Toronto, you'll know that Law and Order used to air on A&E at 1 p.m. and 11 p.m. every single day. The reruns would air on Law and Order. And I used to watch them with my auntie and my parents every day. It's the only show that I was ever a fan of, to the extent where it's part of my vernacular in my life with my family and friends. So for example, my best girlfriend will say, like, love you more than Law and Order, as like our sign off sort of phrase, right? My cousin, I have my cousin Ben, who I'm really close with. Anytime there was anything about Law and Order, he'd always send it to me. Like that box set behind my head there, I bought a disc drive, and I used to travel with those DVDs because this is pre-streaming, right? And I still have a disc drive because not all the seasons stream. So like season 1, 2, and 5, I have to take my discs with me. So anyway, I could go on.
Right.
One quick story is one of my good friends, Kristen Kruk, who I did Burden of Truth with, amazing actor. Everyone knows who Kristen is. She's a Canadian legend. She and I did 4 seasons of Burden of Truth together, and we got really close, and she knew this about me. And one day we were with another actor in the airport, and they asked me for something, and I was like, oh, let me check my bag. And I opened my carry-on and flipped it open. And this was a young woman, and she looked at it and she went, are those Law and Order DVDs and a disc drive? And Kristen went, yes, it's okay. You don't need. And she was like, Nicola, you don't have to talk about it. Because it's my thing, and people don't get it. Anyway, so the announcement comes out, Law and Order Toronto is coming, and I start getting messages from family and friends being like, oh my God, your show's coming to Toronto. And right away I was like, oh my God, I have to. Because I used to think about like going to New York just to try and get like a walk on. Like even when I started playing leads and stuff, I was like, I just want to be some part of the world, the Law and Order world. But then it ended. It ended. But I'm an original Law and Order fan. So anyway, I start literally getting messages from family members and friends being like, oh my God, Law and Order's coming to Toronto. You must be so excited. And so the audition process, there's a couple of lessons for me that I'm going to continue to take with me from that audition process. So I auditioned for the lead. A bunch of us auditioned. There was like a bunch of people you had to be Canadian because it started for obvious reasons, but also because the SAG strike was happening, but also they were doing a Canadian version of it, and one of the things, all the leads and regulars had to be Canadian,
which is great.
So yeah, totally amazing. So a bunch of us auditioned for the lead, and I auditioned for the lead originally. I'm pretty realistic about things, and I had a pretty good idea that wasn't going to happen before. There's lots of reasons why, but my business mind is honed at this point, right? Then I got an audition for a guest star, and weirdly, for some reason, they started casting guest stars for the first episode of the show before they cast there's only 6 regular characters on the show, right? I had no way of knowing this, but my gut was just like, I was like, I think I want to wait and just see if anything else comes down the pipe, which I never do. I'm a firm believer in taking every audition that comes, but my gut just was like, I just want to see, like, presumably it's going to be on for a while. So, I just want to see, I want to see what happens. And lo and behold, a week or 2 later, the audition comes out for the number 5. So number 5 on the call sheet. So one of the 6 regular characters comes out, and it's the pathologist. And she was originally written as a woman in her 50s, 50s or 60s. Very different, nothing in common with me. The original sides were sort of like a quirky older woman. I think she was originally a white woman, and very quirky. And I loved the script. Tassie's amazing. The script was amazing, but I really wanted. I felt like I had a shot. I really wanted to take the shot, right? Like, I just had this thing where I was like, and the casting directors, I know them, they know my work, they know, they know what I'm capable of. They see me do a million things. The producers at that point would have been familiar. So I was like, I want to show them what I can do. I also know something about procedurals, which is that those characters, I watch a lot of procedurals, and this is what we were talking about earlier about knowing your genre, right? I know in procedurals that those characters, the regulars who are not the 2 lead police officers, and this is on like a million procedural shows, there's always a pathologist, there's always a tech person, there's often like a gun expert, right?
Right.
And those characters do tend to have a specific thing about them, right? Because they're not in a lot of the show. They're usually in 1 or 2 scenes per episode. So there's usually something about the character that stands out. And that's something that I love about procedurals. So I know that about procedurals, but I also know that when they're casting, I think a lot of people, when they're casting, are more open-minded than we think, right? I do think that with some auditions, it is possible to change their minds if you have an idea. Other times, they really want straight down the barrel. So what I did was I did 2 separate audition tapes. I did one that was super quirky, really fun. But again, I didn't try and do the character as written because she was a 50-something, 60-something-year-old white woman that was not going to be me. So there's no point in trying to do that. I think that's always the wrong move, right? They know me. They're not going to ask for me. The Forrest sisters know me. Producers know me. They're not going to ask for me if they don't think that there's something I could bring to it. So I'm not going to try and do someone I'm not. I'm going to bring what I can to it. So I did like a quirky kind of like high pony, high energy, kind of funny character for my first audition. And for the second one, I did like, bam, straight, no humor, completely professional, sort of very neurodivergent kind of take on the second tape. And I sent them both, and my team just sent a note saying, can you please watch? Nicola would really appreciate if you watched both. And I trust that they will, because they're good casting directors, they're good producers. So I felt, and they did, they watched both. So then for the callback, they were like, we want this one. And they chose which one they wanted, which was the opposite of what the original kind of character description was. They liked the one that I did that was completely down the barrel serious, right? And the comedy and Tassie's writing is so great because the comedy still plays that way, right? Tassie's writing is amazing that way, where you can find a lot in it, right? So anyway, so I went into the callback and they said, we want that. And so I went hard for that, because there's times to play, but if they tell you, do this, do that. They're telling you what they want, right? So I went to the callback. I did it 100% the way they asked. I also did the first take, and they were like, great, thank you. And I was like, I want to do it again. Can I please do it again? I feel like I missed, there's a beat I wanted to play. And they were like, and you could see that they're kind of like, we feel like we got it. And it was one of the only times where I was like, please, I just feel like there's something I wanted to do. And so they were like, okay, Nicholas, they let me do it again. And by the end of the day, I got the call by the end of the day.
My God, what a dream. Same day you found out?
Same day. I started crying in my car. I was just like, because it really, there's 3 things in my career that harken back to my childhood, that there's things in your life that come to you as an adult. And then there's things that it's like your childhood self is being given a gift. And the first one was when I was 23, I got to play, I'd been a big Degrassi fan as a young person, as like an 8-year-old. And my favorite character is Joey Jeremiah. And then in my 20s, on New Generation, I got to play Joey Jeremiah's girlfriend and like make out with Joey Jeremiah and talk about Snake and Spike and scenes. And so that was a big childhood dream fulfilled. I got to do a movie with Megan Follows, who I used to write letters to in my journal when I was 10, not 12, it's a bit old for doing that. But when I was 8, 9, 10, I used to write letters to her. From Anne of Green Gables, I got to work with her and we played lovers on a show. And that was like, and we've worked together many times since, but that was on, and then this. So it's like, basically I have got to enter the world of all of my childhood, my favorite childhood, dream worlds, which is such a huge, huge thing. But that audition process for Law and Order, there were so many lessons in that. The other lesson in that I wanted to share is that auditioning is really hard. It was hard when it was in person. I actually prefer online. That's a whole other conversation. I actually would never go back to in-person auditions if I didn't have to for a few very specific reasons. It was hard to do in person, but it's even harder sometimes now online. So the day that I got that call back, it was a very short turnaround and I was shooting that day. And I was like, I can't do it. I'm shooting all day. I don't know where my lunch break is. And I knew the producer of the show I was working on. I was close with the producer and I messaged him and I said, I really want to do this callback. Is there any way you can make this work for me? And so they put lunch I was very lucky. They put lunch at the time of the callback. But I was like, oh, it's going to be terrible. I'm going to be in this. And it was a small trailer. It was like a show with galley trailers. So it was like, I was right up against the camera and it was hard to set up. I was like stacking suitcases on them. I was like, oh my God. And I thought this is going to be, and I brought my lights and everything. And then I was like, there's going to be noise. And the second AD took his lunch break to lock up the trailer area so that I could do my callback without anyone walking and I've worked with him since many times. And like everywhere we go, I tell people the story because it was just this kindness that they all did me.
Yeah.
But it was just another reminder that like, it's not about being able to do it perfectly. It's about doing your best and then saying, okay, you know what? This is the best I can do. And then doing your best work inside that framework, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we beat ourselves up about not being able to create the best environment, if we beat ourselves up about it not being the best day, there's no career in that. There's no longevity in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I learned a million things in the Law and Order audition process. Yeah.
That's
Right.
amazing.
And I feel like it
love
all
that.
kind of full circles back to the technique bit, right? Because it can be really easy to freak out and be like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to ask. I know I messed up and you're just kicking yourself, but you remain calm. You
Totally.
did what you had to do. And then when things didn't go right the first time, you just said, please, can I do it again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take the time that you have. And in terms of what you were asking about the technique what's interesting about Law and Order is that when you play something like a pathologist, learning the lines, it's kind of like learning another language. So because racism, I had to speak a lot of languages that I don't speak early in my career, right? Because all my characters had, so I'm pretty good at like learning lines that I don't understand, right? And it's very similar. Learning lines that when you don't know the words, like literally because you can't improvise, there's no way out. You know what I mean? Like if there were whole paragraphs, like I remember I had a paragraph in one episode of Law and Order. I think I've done 20 episodes now, but I had one paragraph where I was like, I don't know a single one of these words. I've never heard a single one of these words. So I will take like with the kind of contract I'm on with Law and Order, I'm allowed to do other things at the same time because I only shoot 1 or 2 days an episode. And, there's, some other day we'll talk about negotiating and stuff and the pros and cons.
Gosh, you have so much knowledge.
But I chose to take a contract where I get to do other things. It means that there's no priority. So it means that I make less money, but I get to do other things. So that's a whole other conversation about the kind of career you want to have, et cetera, et cetera. So what's great about it is that I do get to do other things. What's so funny about Law and Order is that a couple of times I've been shooting other things at the same time. And I can learn, I kid you not, 8 pages of dialogue for something else in the same amount of time that it takes me to learn 1 page of Law and Order, because it's all not just medical jargon, but she's a genius. My character is a genius.
Right.
She's brilliant. Her brain was born to do this work. She loves it. She knows every word. It comes off her tongue like that. So not only do you have to memorize it, but I have to be able to like move through it at a pace with conviction and authority and like all of those things. And that authority requires a core understanding. So usually what I do is, first of all, I research obviously every word. I research everything. Sometimes try and get visuals of it. I find visuals very helpful if I can picture what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I even get to the point where I have to use like those old memorizing techniques. Like, let's say I have 3 medical words in a row. I'll create like, I don't know, like if it, I don't know, I'm just making this up.
You're like tapping your head. Yeah.
Or like esophagus, perineum, gastrointestinal. It's like EPG. And I like try and figure, I don't know, like just, I do honestly talk about technique. I think I pull out more technique elements to learn one page, but it's amazing. And it feels so good when you're doing it. And I love props, and it's it really is an incredible role and an incredible job. But yeah, it's crazy. The memorization is such a technical, just a technical training ground every day. It's amazing. Yeah.
That's the beauty of this job. You're always learning. Okay, we have reached our hour, and I know you have to go, so we'll just wrap it up with maybe 2 more questions, and then we're on our way. Okay, great. What is, there's a lot of actors and artists who listen to this podcast. What is one piece of encouragement or advice that you'd offer to creatives out there who are struggling or trying to advance their career? Or any advice that you've received from a mentor along the way that has stuck with you and you'd like to share?
I think one of the big ones is don't put the rest of your life on hold in the hopes that your career will fall into place. Your career can fall into place while you are on the other parts of your life journey. Right. A big example of that with women that I talk to a lot is the fear of having children, for example. Right. Like some women don't want to have children, and so it's not an issue. But for women in my life who want to have children, there's really still this narrative, which I was told, which was like, well, don't do it because don't do it until your career's in place, because after that, it can't happen. My experience was the exact opposite. My career really took off when I got my first really big job when I had a 4-month-old baby. And not because my body bounced back and I had my son had colic. My son had terrible colic. I was 185 pounds and sleeping 2 hours a night. And I only bring up the weight issue because that was the thing that I was told was going to be my biggest barrier. Wasn't an issue. If anything, having my son focused me more in some ways, made me care a lot less, which was something that made me very attractive because people love, for some weird reason, it's really counter. But when you go in being like, hi, I only have 5 minutes, instead of being like, I have whatever you need. What do you need? What do you need? Right.
Right.
So I don't think I think also a lot of people I know get very stressed out because they're like, well, I want to travel, or I want to have a child, or I want to meet someone, or I want to move to this other place, or I want to do all these things, but I can't because my career hasn't happened yet. And there's 2 things. The danger is it's something we have to accept, that our careers may not happen. There's things we may not get. And you don't want to ever look back and feel like you missed out on everything else because of that. In a perfect world, your career does happen the way you want it to. But along the way, doing the things that you also want to do in your life will make you feel better about your career choices, will make you feel better about, there's a real trap in, I defined myself solely by my work for so much of my life, all through my teens, all through my 20s. Even now, it's something I work on in therapy a lot, is like when I'm not working, feeling like a failure or not knowing who I am if I'm not working. But as soon as I decided to go for it and have the baby that I desperately wanted to have, and I didn't have a lot of time. I have endometriosis. We didn't even know if it was possible. I couldn't wait longer. Right now, it's like, and also focusing, I've been focusing on stuff. Like if I want to take a trip now, I do it. And if I get an audition, I'll do it from there. And I don't care if the backdrop isn't as good as it could have been. Right. If things like prioritizing other things at the same time has made me feel better about my career, because it's not the only thing anymore that feels like it has value, right? So that's a big one. And it's also just not true that you can't have a family and work. It's not true that you can't, even people who are passionate about other things. So for example, yes, if you have a full-time job, another full-time job, realistically, your chances of achieving your goals in your art form are not as likely, only because you don't have the time to commit, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't find other career paths or other jobs that allow you to do both, that you can be passionate about, or tweaks that you can make, right? And, I kept teaching and coaching, which I loved, way longer than I needed to financially or professionally, because I enjoyed it, but also because I was scared to let it go. And eventually I let it go when the time came, when I actually couldn't make the time anymore. It was still possible. I was tired, but it was still possible. So you can do other things. Focus on what you want for the rest of your life. So that was one of the there's never a right time, right? So that was one of the best pieces of advice I was given that has been very true for me. I think the other thing is, and this one is so hard. This one is like the hardest one, I think, for artists is what happens if it doesn't work out? Confront that honestly for yourself. Because I think the fear, like there are things that I have always wanted to accomplish that are not likely to happen at this point in my career. Right. And I have to acknowledge that, say it, and not because I'm not good enough, but because of other things, right? Other things that are, and that has to be okay. My life has to go on. Right. So I think like I found therapy very, very helpful for that, to really confront if things don't work out the way you want professionally, what else is there? What else can be? And also, how can you adjust? Like one thing that I've found is my career has gone almost because I was told I probably wouldn't have it because of racism and gender and body type. It's been even sweeter to have it, right? It just makes it better.
Yeah.
But I think we have to be able to find joy and find a sense of excitement about the future while confronting that it may not look like we hoped it would look, right? Ironically, and I will say this, ironically, I think one of the gifts of my career is like with the conventions, for example, getting to experience being a famous person that people jump at from behind bushes and people scream and yell and cheer for you and stay outside your hotel and whatever. I've now experienced that. And it turns out I'm really glad that isn't the way I'll never win an Academy Award. I'll probably never star. I'll probably never be number one in an American TV show, but I also won't have to deal with that, which it turns out I wouldn't have wanted. I look at some of my friends who are playing leads on TV. I always wanted to be a lead, a big number one on a big show. When I look at my friends who are doing it, they make a lot of sacrifices for that I'm not sure I actually would want, right? So we romanticize what we think we want. And if I ask myself, the people whose careers I think I want, when it gets down to the nitty gritty of getting to know them and talking to them, they've given up things that I wouldn't be willing to give up, right? So letting go of the romantic notion of what we thought we wanted for our careers and being realistic about what can I be satisfied with and grow the rest of my life as well, I think is really important. Because COVID, the SAG strike, the current American political climate, if Trump gets another term, which, if he's able to rewrite the law books and our industry may not recover for a decade. We don't know how long it's going to take for the industry to recover. So there's whole pockets of people right now who will never get to even try and achieve what we've been able to achieve, right?
Right.
That can't mean their life is over. That can't mean their life as artists has no meaning, right?
Yeah.
So we have to find a way to take our careers and what we're accomplishing and achieving and keep working towards our goals, but keeping in sight that this is one life that we have to live and we have to find a way to be happy in it. And it can't be tied to whether or not we hit X, Y, and Z milestone, right? Yeah. And I guess those two things are connected. The first thing I said and the second thing, basically do the work to be happy in our lives, regardless of where our careers take us. And it's a challenge, but it's going to be the best. I think it's the best thing we can do for ourselves.
Absolutely.
And then it makes the work we do it makes what we do achieve even better, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, final question. Nicola, we ask this to all of our guests. When you hear the phrase hitting her mark, what does that mean for you? How do you define success in your life? It could be personally or professionally or however you see that phrase.
Like right off the chest.
Yeah.
The mark's going to shift all the time. The mark's going to move.
Yeah.
And you'll set a mark. Someone else will set a mark for you, or you'll set a mark, and then it's got to change. Something's going to change, and you got to go hit the next one and hit the next one, hit the next one. Marks are fluid. Marks move, and you want to hit them wherever they go. And that, I think, for me, is what marks are about. They change, they move, they're fluid, and we need to be too.
What a great
answer.
Me too.
Everyone's so different, and I love it. That is so great. Thank you, Nicola, for being here with us today. That was a wonderful conversation. I'm sure our listeners will get a lot of value out of it. Thank you so much.
It's been such a pleasure. This was so lovely. Thank you so much for inviting me. This was so great. I feel better for moving into the next season. Thank you.
Yay.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Enjoy your day.
Thanks for tuning in to Hitting Her Mark. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. For more content and updates, follow us on Instagram at Hitting Her Mark.